This file from 1901 brings us to the remote depths of the Grand Canyon, where a seasoned outdoorsman's routine exploration became an encounter with something that challenged the boundaries between human and beast. You're browsing the Cryptid Archives, narrative short stories based on real cryptid encounters, presented by Cryptids Across the Atlas. Blood on the Canyon Walls. The Colorado River had been my guide for 3 days, its muddy waters carrying my skiff deeper into the canyon than I'd ever ventured before. Now, I was no stranger to wilderness. By 1901, I'd spent more nights under the stars than under roofs, and the natural world held few surprises for me these days. Well, or so I believed. My name is Ingvald Walter Stevens, though most folks just call me IW. The wilderness had been my true home since I was old enough to shoulder a rifle. While other men my age were building careers in the booming cities of America's new century, I found my fortune in solitude, in the spaces between civilization, where a man could still breathe free. That love of wild places would eventually lead me to purchase my own 400-acre island, but in 1901, I was still a wanderer, following rivers and ridgelines wherever they led. My business in northwestern Arizona had wrapped up quicker than I'd expected. I'd been negotiating lumber rights with a small outfit near the canyon's rim. Tedious work that reminded me why I preferred trees standing to trees felled. With several days before I was expected back in Flagstaff, I decided to explore the lower reaches of the canyon, a place few white men had seen and even fewer had mapped. Now, the Grand Canyon was different back then. No guardrails, no tourist paths, no hotels perched on the rim. Just raw, primordial wilderness that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of society. The indigenous peoples, the Hualapai and Havasupai, they had their own names for this place, their own stories about what dwelt in its depths. I'd heard fragments of these tales from an old Hualapai guide I'd met years before. He'd spoken of the canyon as this living thing, a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin. Some men go down, he told me, his weathered face serious in the firelight, but not all men come back up. And those who do, sometimes they're different. I dismissed it as folklore then. Now, rowing through the canyon's shadowed depths, his words carried a little more weight. The river was a different creature than the tame waterways back east. It ran thick with silt, the color of dried blood, carrying the eroded bones of mountains toward the distant sea. My skiff, sturdy though she was, felt fragile as an eggshell against the river's patient power. I'd launched from a rough camp at the canyon's lower end, where a few prospectors and drifters had built temporary shelters. None of them had wanted to join my upstream expedition. "Nothing good up that way," one grizzled miner had muttered, not meeting my eyes. "River gets strange, men see things." But I'd been seeing things in the wilderness all my life. Eagles diving for fish, bears standing tall in the morning mist, elk bugling across valleys. Whatever strangeness the canyon held, I figured I'd face worse. Oh, how wrong I was. Now, the first 2 days passed in kind of a dream. The canyon walls rose around me like the architecture of gods, each layer of rock a chapter in the Earth's autobiography. Red sandstone gave way to white limestone, which yielded to dark schist that spoke of unimaginable age. I made good progress, camping on narrow beaches, always keeping my rifle close and my fire small. It was on the morning of the 3rd day that I found the tracks. I'd beached my skiff where the river grew too shallow to navigate, planning to explore on foot. The sand was smooth and unmarked, save for the occasional bird track. until I saw them. Footprints. Human footprints, but wrong in every way that mattered. The prints were bare, pressed deep into the sand with a weight that seemed impossible. The toes splayed wide, gripping the ground in a way that spoke as decades without wearing shoes. But it was the stride that truly puzzled me. Too long for any normal man, covering ground in loping steps. I knelt beside the clearest print, placing my own boot alongside for comparison. My feet aren't small, size 11 boots served me well, but this print dwarfed mine. More disturbing still was the depth. Even carrying my full pack, my boots barely dented the packed sand. These prints sank inches deep. I followed them upstream, my unease growing with each step. The tracks showed no hesitation. Whoever made them knew exactly where they were going, moving across terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. They leapt streams, scaled rocks, always choosing the most direct path regardless of difficulty. As the sun climbed higher, baking the canyon floor, I noticed something else. The tracks seemed fresh. Very fresh. The edges remained sharp, undisturbed by wind. Someone had passed this way recently, perhaps only hours before. That realization made me stop and really look at my surroundings. The canyon had gone silent. Not the natural quiet of midday heat, but something deeper. No lizards scuttled across the rocks. No birds called from the scraggly plants clinging to the cliff faces. Even the river seemed to murmur more quietly, as if trying not to draw attention. I made my camp early that day, choosing a spot with good sightlines and the cliff wall at my back. As I gathered driftwood for my fire, I found more tracks. These circled my chosen campsite at a distance, as if someone had already scouted this location. The thought that I was following someone who might also be watching me sent a chill down my spine despite the desert heat. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the pop of my dying fire, the distant rumble of rocks falling, the whisper of the wind through stone, it all kept me on edge. Several times I could have sworn I heard something almost like singing, a wordless melody that seemed to come from the cliffs themselves. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but grimly determined to solve this mystery. I found new tracks at the water's edge, barely 20 feet from where I'd laid my bedroll. My watcher had grown bold during the night, approaching close enough to observe me clearly. The footprints showed where he'd crouched for a long period, perhaps studying me as I slept. The violation of it, the patient surveillance, made my skin crawl. But I'd come too far to back down now. My pride, perhaps, or that curious streak that had always driven me into wild places, wouldn't let me retreat without answers. So I broke camp and continued upstream, following the fresher tracks with renewed purpose. The canyon narrowed as I progressed, the walls pressing closer, the sky shrinking to a ribbon of blue far overhead. The tracks led me through increasingly difficult terrain, over boulder fields, along narrow ledges, through stands of thorny mesquite that tore at my clothes. Whoever I was following moved through this landscape with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. It was mid-morning when I rounded a bend and froze. There, perhaps 200 feet up on the cliff face, a figure sat motionless on a narrow ledge. Even at that distance, every instinct I developed over decades in the wilderness screamed that something was deeply wrong. The figure was human in shape, but altered somehow. The proportions were off, the stillness too complete. No man sat that motionless unless he was dead, or unless he was something else entirely. I studied the cliff face, plotting a route. I'd done my share of climbing over the years, though nothing like what this ascent would require. But the figure hadn't moved. It seemed almost unaware or unconcerned by my presence. If I could get closer, perhaps I could solve this mystery that had consumed my thoughts for the last 3 days. I returned to my skiff and rowed to the base of the cliff. Then I began to climb. The rock was hot under my hands, rough granite that offered decent holds at best. I climbed carefully but steadily, pausing occasionally to check on the figure above, yet still it hadn't moved, maintaining that unnatural stillness that raised every hair on my body. At 50 yards, I finally got a clear look at what I'd been tracking, and my mind struggled to process what my eyes reported. The creature, I can no longer think of it as simply a man, sat cross-legged on the ledge, facing out over the canyon. Hair white as fresh snow cascaded down its back, tangled and matted into rope-like strands. A beard of equal length pulled around its seated form. But it was the body itself that defied belief. Not a stitch of clothing covered its form, revealing skin burned dark by the desert sun, where it had showed through a coat of gray hair. This wasn't the fine hair that sometimes grow on a man's back or chest. This was a pelt, like what you'd find on an animal. The muscles beneath were corded and lean. You could tell by looking, this thing held tremendous power. The hands resting on its knees ended in nails that had grown into yellowed claws, each at least 2 inches long and curved like talons. The feet were splayed and tough, adapted to gripping rock, the nails there equally overgrown. This was a being that had abandoned, or had been abandoned by, civilization so long ago that its very body had changed to match its wild existence. We regarded each other across the diminishing distance, and I saw in those eyes human intelligence trapped in a form that had moved beyond humanity. Its eyes were green as oxidized copper, holding experience I couldn't fathom out here. And there was no surprise in that gaze, no fear, only a kind of patience, as if it had been waiting for me, or someone like me, for a very long time. A sound from above shattered our silent communion. The clatter of loose rock tumbling down the cliff face. Something large was moving up there, disturbing stones as it passed. The wild man's eyes snapped from mine to the cliff above, and in that instant, everything changed. The transformation was shocking. The meditative stillness vanished as the creature exploded into motion. It released a shriek that no human throat should be able to produce, a sound that combined rage, warning, and something else, something so primal that it spoke directly to the primitive parts of my brain. It leapt to its feet with fluid grace, and I saw it stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. In its right hand it gripped a massive club, the wood worn smooth by years of use, gnarled and heavy enough to crush a man's skull with ease. It bounded across the cliff face with impossible agility, covering in seconds distances that would have taken me careful minutes to traverse. Then it stopped on a broader ledge and turned to face me again. It raised the club overhead and screamed once more. The sound echoing off the canyon walls like the cry of a demon. The noise was so unexpected, so utterly wrong, coming from something shaped like a man, that I nearly lost my grip on the cliff. And then it charged. The creature came at me across the vertical landscape as easily as I might run across a meadow. It leapt gaps that should have been impossible, its clawed feet finding purchase on the smallest holds, its free hand occasionally touching the rock for balance. The club swung with each bound, and I could hear its breathing now, deep, rhythmic pants like a hunting predator. I had perhaps 3 seconds at most to make a decision that would determine whether I lived or died in that canyon. My rifle was slung across my back, loaded and ready. I'd hunted dangerous game before, bear, mountain lion, even a wounded buffalo once, but I'd never faced anything that moved with such terrifying purpose, such a blend of human and animal. 15 yards. I pulled my rifle around, working the lever to chamber around. 10 yards. I could see details now. Scars crisscrossing the gray-haired skin, muscles bunching and releasing with each movement, those green eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed almost personal. 8 yards. I raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel, trying to decide where to aim. A leg shot might cripple without killing, but this thing's agility made hitting a limb nearly impossible. 5 yards. Its lips pulled back, revealing teeth yellowed and worn, but still sharp enough to rend flesh. The club started its downward arc. That's when the mountain lion announced itself with a growl that seemed to come from the stone itself. The cat crouched on a ledge directly above us, having stalked one or both of us along the cliff top. It was massive, a tom in his prime, muscles coiled to spring. In that frozen instant, I understood the situation with crystalline clarity. The wild man and I had been so focused on each other that neither had noticed death creeping above us on padded feet. The lion gathered itself to a leap, and I made my choice. I swung the rifle up and fired in one smooth motion, the crack of the shot splitting the desert air like thunder. The bullet took the cat's center mass just as it launched itself into space. Its dying scream mixed with the echo of gunfire as its body tumbled past where the wild man had stood a heartbeat before. But the creature had vanished. In the split second of my shot, it had thrown itself sideways with reflexes no human should possess, disappearing into a crevice I hadn't even noticed. The lion's body crashed onto the ledge, rolled once, and came to a rest in a spreading pool of blood. The silence that followed was deafening. My ears rang from the gunshot. My hands shook with adrenaline, and somewhere in that maze of rock, the wild man waited. I could feel his presence, knew he was watching, evaluating. The dynamic between us had shifted. I'd saved his life, or at least spared him a mauling, but I'd also proven I could kill. Moving carefully, rifle at the ready, I began descending toward my boat. Every shadow could hide that gray form. Every crevice might conceal those burning green eyes. But nothing moved except the wind and my own trembling limbs. I reached the skiff and pushed off quickly, letting the current carry me away from that cursed cliff. I had drifted perhaps 50 yards when movement on the ledge caught my eye again. The wild man had emerged from his hiding and now stood over the lion's carcass. What I witnessed then would haunt me the rest of my days. He approached the dead cat with obvious caution, prodding it once with his club to ensure it was truly dead. He dropped then to all fours beside the lion's body, positioning himself at the wounds my bullet had torn. He lowered his head, watched in horrified fascination as he began to drink. The blood flowed fresh and hot from the death wounds, and he lapped at it like an animal at a stream, his gray-haired body crouched there in feral communion with his meal. The sight sickened me. This wasn't just survival, this was something ritualistic, something that spoke of habits developed over years of isolation from human society. His throat worked as he swallowed, and blood darkened his white beard, turning it the color of rust. I couldn't help myself. I stood in my boat and shouted, not words, just a cry of revulsion and, strangely, pity. What had this creature been before the canyon claimed him? What tragedy had driven a man to become this? He sprang to his feet at my call, blood still dripping from his beard. Our eyes met across the water, and in that final exchange, I saw something that chilled me more than all his animal behavior. I saw recognition. Not just awareness of my presence, but it was almost as if he remembered what it was like to be human, or at least knew what it meant to. It seemed like he remembered and had chosen to abandon humanity altogether. He raised his club one final time and gave that terrible shriek, the sound rolling across the water like a curse. Then he turned and scaled the cliff face with spider-like agility, pausing once at the top to look back. Silhouetted against the narrow strip of sky, I caught a glimpse of what we might become if civilization's hold ever truly broke. Then he was gone, vanishing into whatever hidden realm he inhabited in the canyon's secret places. I paddled hard back to my camp, packed quickly, and left that same day. The journey downstream passed in a blur, my mind struggling to process what I'd witnessed. By the time I reached the ramshackle sediment at the canyon's mouth, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by the heat or isolation, or both. But the other men there took one look at my face and knew better. "You seen him," the old miner said. It wasn't a question. The wild man. He's real then. I could only nod, not trusting my voice. The miner spat tobacco juice and studied me with knowing eyes. "Hualapai say he's been there since their grandfather's time, maybe longer. They say he was 3 men once. Prisoners. The Navajos set adrift on the river, tied to logs. The river was high, running fierce. Should have killed 'em all." He paused, seeming to weigh how much to tell me. "Story goes that one man chewed through his bonds, animal-like. Near drowned, but somehow made it to shore. Canyon took him in, but it changed him. Made him something not quite right anymore. Hualapai leave him offerings sometimes, deer meat, corn. Say he keeps worse things at bay, things that live deeper in the canyon." "Worse things?" I managed to ask. The miner just shook his head. "Some questions, friend, you don't want answered." I left Arizona that next week and didn't return for many, many years, but the memory of that encounter never faded. In quiet moments, especially when I was alone in wild places, I'd find myself thinking about the creature in the canyon. What had driven him to drink blood like an animal? Was it mere survival, or had his transformation gone deeper than flesh and bone? Years later, I heard more stories. A surveying team reported finding caves high in the canyon walls filled with bones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. Prospectors spoke of screams in the night that sounded almost like words in a language no one recognized. And always, always, there were the tracks. Those impossibly deep tracks that appeared after storms, following routes no human should know. I eventually settled on my island in what would become Voyageurs National Park, finding in its isolation a peace I'd never known in civilization. But even there, surrounded by the gentle wilderness of Minnesota, I sometimes woke from dreams of green eyes and bloody beards, of clubs raised against the desert sky, and screams that echoed off ancient stone. The naturalist in me wants to explain what I saw rationally. Perhaps the wild man was indeed a survivor of some frontier tragedy, driven mad by isolation and adapted to his harsh environment, through necessity. The blood drinking could be explained by dietary needs, iron deficiency, or some other nutritional lack. The inhuman agility might come from decades of climbing, the hair growth from some glandular condition, I don't know, but the man who stood in that boat watching a creature that had crossed the line between human and other, he knows better. What I saw in the Grand Canyon wasn't just a man gone wild. It was something that had chosen to step outside the boundaries of humanity itself, that had found in the canyon's depth a different way of being. Sometimes transformation isn't gradual. Sometimes it's a choice, made in extremity to survive at any cost. And sometimes the cost is everything that once made us human. This short story was based on an encounter originally documented in historical records from 1901. Links to the original encounter, along with our full episode on Arizona's Mogollon Monster, can be found in the show notes below. What do you make of IW's theory about the captured men set adrift by hostile Native Americans? While extreme isolation and trauma can certainly affect human behavior and appearance, could years of survival in the harsh canyon environment really transform someone so dramatically? The drinking of fresh blood, the inhuman agility, the coat of gray hair, do these details suggest adaptation to an extreme environment? Or might we be looking at something that was never fully human to begin with? And what should we make of the miner's claim that the Hualapai leave offerings, suggesting this being serves some greater purpose in the canyon's ecosystem? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to hit that follow button. If you enjoyed this encounter, please consider leaving an honest review. It helps other cryptid enthusiasts find these stories of the unexplained. And remember to keep your eyes open.